I never thought the day my daughter called me a selfish, greedy old man would be the day I finally understood what my wife meant when she used to say, "Raymond, love without limits isn't love, it's surrender." My name is Raymond Caldwell. I'm 63 years old, and for the past 11 years, I've lived alone in the same three-bedroom house in Dayton, Ohio, where I raised my two kids after their mother, Carol, passed away from ovarian cancer in 2013. She was 51. She had just retired from teaching fourth grade. We had plans: a trip to Portugal, a vegetable garden in the backyard, lazy mornings with nowhere to be. Cancer doesn't care about plans. After Carol died, I kept working at the parts distribution warehouse where I'd been a shift supervisor for 22 years. I worked because I had to. I worked because I had to. I worked because stopping meant sitting still in a house that still smelled like her. My son moved to Phoenix after college. He calls on birthdays, sometimes Christmas. It's fine. We are what we are. My daughter, though, she stayed close. She married a man I'll call my son-in-law. And for a while I told myself I was lucky to have family nearby. I should have paid closer attention to what nearby actually cost me. It started on a Tuesday evening in October. My daughter and her husband came over for dinner, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the folder my son-in-law set on my kitchen table before I'd even finished setting out the plates. "Dad," my daughter said, and she had that voice, the one Carol used to say, meant she'd already decided something and was only now informing me. "We need to talk about the house." The house. My house. The one I'd owned outright since 2019 when I made the final mortgage payment and treated myself to a ribeye at the Applebee's on Valley Street. The house where my daughter had grown up, where she'd had her prom photos taken on the front porch, where I'd sat in the dark living room the night Carol died and talked to her picture for 3 hours straight. "What about the house?" I asked. My son-in-law opened the folder. Inside were printed pages, real estate estimates, renovation cost breakdowns, something that looked like a business prospectus. He'd clearly spent time on this. "We want to open a second location for the gym," he said. He owned a small fitness studio about 20 minutes away. It did okay. Nothing spectacular, but okay. "There's a commercial space on Wilmington Pike that's perfect, but the bank won't give us the startup loan we need without more collateral." I stood there holding a serving spoon and said nothing, so he continued. "If you signed the house over as collateral, we could get the loan. The business would cover payments. You'd still live here. Nothing would change." I looked at my daughter. She was looking at the folder. "Nothing would change," I repeated slowly. "Dad, it's just paperwork," she said. "The business is solid. We've run the numbers." I put the serving spoon down. "I need some time to think about this." That was apparently the wrong answer. My son-in-law's expression shifted in a way I hadn't seen before. Not quite anger, but something close to it. Patient contempt, maybe. "Raymond," he said, and he always called me Raymond when he wanted to sound reasonable. "We've already spoken to a loan officer. The timeline is tight. We need an answer by the end of the month." "Then I'll have an answer by the end of the month," I said. Dinner was quiet after that. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in the dark thinking about Carol, about what she would have said. She had always liked my son-in-law well enough, but she had a saying she'd use when someone pushed too hard, too fast. "Urgency is a salesman's trick, Raymond." I thought about that a lot over the next few days. The calls started almost immediately. My daughter called the following morning, then that evening, then again the next day at lunch. My son-in-law sent a long text explaining the opportunity, the projected revenue, the 5-year growth plan. On Thursday, my daughter stopped by unannounced and sat in my living room with her hands folded in her lap like a person who had rehearsed being patient. "Dad, I know this feels fast," she said. "It is fast. But opportunities don't wait. This space won't be available forever." "Honey," I said, "I hear you. I'm still thinking." Her jaw tightened slightly. "What is there to think about? You live here alone. It's just a signature. If everything goes according to plan, you'd never even know the paperwork existed." And there it was, the phrase that was supposed to make me feel like the problem was my own overthinking. Just a signature. As if my home, the one thing I owned free and clear after 40 years of working, was a minor inconvenience standing between them and what they wanted. What if it doesn't go according to plan? I asked. She stood up. I can't believe you don't trust us. She left before I could answer. The dynamic shifted after that. The warmth that had always been there, the Sunday dinners, the phone calls about nothing in particular, the way she'd still call me daddy when she was tired, it evaporated. She became formal, efficient. She'd call to pass along information rather than talk. My son-in-law stopped calling altogether. 3 weeks after that first conversation, they came over together again. This time, there was no folder. My son-in-law stood in the middle of my kitchen with his arms crossed and told me in a very level voice that they had found a co-signer willing to back the loan, but the interest rate would be significantly higher, and the monthly payments would strain their cash flow. And if I had just helped them from the beginning, none of this would be necessary. I'm sorry that puts you in a harder position, I said honestly. Are you? My son-in-law said. Excuse me? Are you sorry? Because a man who was sorry would have helped his family when they needed it. I looked at my daughter, expecting her to say something. She didn't. I want you to leave, I said quietly. My son-in-law took a step toward me, not aggressive, but deliberate, close enough that I noticed. You know what your problem is, Raymond. You've got money sitting around doing nothing, and you're too stubborn and too selfish to use it for the people who actually show up for you. Leave, I said again. He shook his head, almost like he pitied me. Then he walked out. My daughter followed him without a word. I sat down at the kitchen table. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. I felt something cold and quiet settling in my chest. Not grief, not anger. Something more deliberate than either. What my son-in-law didn't know, what my daughter didn't know, was that I had never told either of them about the settlement. In 28, 3 years before I retired, there was an accident at the warehouse. A forklift operator lost control near my station. I was injured badly enough to require 2 surgeries on my left knee and 4 months of physical therapy. The warehouse's insurance company settled with me out of court. The settlement was significant. $240,000 paid directly to a personal account I opened specifically for that purpose at a credit union across town. Not the bank I'd used for decades, not the account my direct deposit went into, not anywhere either of my kids had ever seen a statement from. I kept that money separate. After what happened with Carol, the medical bills, the way money had suddenly become terrifying, I never wanted to feel that exposed again. I didn't spend it. I didn't talk about it. I treated it like it didn't exist. The same way Carol used to put emergency cash in an envelope in the freezer behind the vegetables, just in case. My son-in-law had called me selfish. He thought I was hoarding a modest pension. He had no idea. I called my old friend and former coworker, a man named Dale, the weekend after that argument. Dale had gone to law school later in life, started at 42, and now worked as a civil attorney in Cincinnati. We'd stayed in touch over the years. The kind of friendship that doesn't need constant maintenance to survive. I need advice, I told him. Not socially, professionally. Tell me everything, he said. I did. By the time I finished, there was a long pause on his end. Raymond, he said, do you have any of these conversations recorded or in writing? The texts from my son-in-law are still on my phone. The ones where he explains the loan, the timeline, the pressure. Don't delete any of them. And starting today, any conversation that gets heated, you record it. Most states, including Ohio, are one-party consent. You're a party to the conversation, so you can record it legally without telling them. What am I building toward? I asked. You're building toward protection, Dale said. Right now, this is a family dispute. Depending on how it escalates, it could become something more. I'd rather have everything documented and need none of it than the other way around. He was right. I bought a small digital voice recorder at a Walmart 2 towns over and started carrying it in my shirt pocket. The escalation came faster than I expected. My daughter called on a Wednesday night, about 6 weeks after the kitchen confrontation. She was crying, genuinely crying, not performed, and she told me the new loan had fallen through. The co-signer had backed out at the last minute. The commercial space was going to be leased to someone else by Friday if they didn't move. Everything they planned was collapsing. I felt something real for her in that moment. Whatever had happened between us, she was still my daughter. I still remembered teaching her to ride a bike in this same driveway. I'm so sorry, I said. That's a hard situation. Dad, please. Her voice broke. I'm asking you, not as a business thing, as your daughter. Please help us. Just this once. The house is just collateral. You'd never lose it if we do everything right. I almost said yes. I want to be honest about that. The part of me that had carried her through Carol's illness, that had driven her to school dances and stayed up worrying about her, that part almost said yes right then. But I'd heard something in the preceding weeks that I hadn't told Dale yet. 2 weeks earlier, I'd run into my neighbor, a retired woman named Evelyn who lived 3 houses down and had been on this street longer than I had. She was walking her dog past my driveway when I was bringing in groceries, and she'd said, almost casually, that she'd seen my son-in-law talking to some men outside my house the previous Saturday. I'd been at a doctor's appointment. She said the men had been pointing at the house, taking photos on their phones. I hadn't said anything to my daughter about it. I'd called Dale instead. Dale had hired someone he trusted, a former detective named Vince who now did private investigation work, to do a quiet background check on my son-in-law's business finances. What Vince found changed everything. The fitness studio wasn't struggling because of an opportunity that needed funding. It was struggling because my son-in-law had borrowed $34,000 over the past 18 months from 3 separate sources. 2 personal loans and 1 cash advance against the business, to cover losses from a sports gambling habit that my daughter apparently knew nothing about. The second location wasn't a growth plan. It was a way to access enough capital to consolidate debts that were becoming dangerous. One of the men Evelyn had seen outside my house was a debt collector. The other, according to Vince's contact in the county sheriff's office, had a prior arrest for harassment and intimidation on behalf of a private lender. My daughter was not asking me to invest in her family's future. She was asking me, without knowing it, to bail her husband out of a mess he'd made and kept completely hidden from her. I sat on that information for 48 hours. Then I called my daughter and told her I wanted to have dinner. Just the 3 of us. I had made a decision. She sounded relieved, grateful. She told me she loved me, and I told her I loved her too. And both of those things were completely true, even in the middle of everything that was happening. They came on a Friday evening. My son-in-law was already performing warmth before he was fully through the door. Handshake, slap on the back. Raymond, good to see you. Smells great in here. I'd made Carol's pot roast. I wanted to be in the kitchen, I knew. We ate first. I asked about their dog. My son-in-law told a story about a client at the gym. My daughter talked about a co-worker. It was almost like before, and I think that made what came next harder for everyone. After dinner, I told them I'd made my decision. I said I was willing to help, but that because of my age and because the house was my only major asset, I needed to understand the full financial picture before I signed anything. I said I'd hired a financial consultant, I didn't say who, to review the business before I committed. My son-in-law went still. That's not necessary, he said carefully. I think it is, I said, for my own peace of mind. We're family, Raymond. This isn't a transaction. You're acting like we're strangers trying to take something from you. I'm acting like a 63-year-old man protecting the only thing I own, I said. I don't think that's unreasonable. His expression changed. I watched it happen. The warmth dropped away like a mask coming off. I've been patient with you, he said. His voice was quiet but different now. Harder. I've explained this 100 times. I've given you every number you asked for, and you keep stalling, keep putting conditions on it, keep acting like we need to prove ourselves to you. He pushed back from the table slightly. My wife has been sick with stress over this for 2 months. You know that? Your daughter, your own daughter, has been losing sleep, and you're sitting here talking about financial consultants. That's enough, my daughter said softly, but she said it to me. Something shifted in my chest. I beg your pardon. Dad, he's right. We've been trying to work with you, and you keep moving the goalposts. How much more do you need from us? I looked at her for a long moment, at the daughter Carol and I had raised. At the woman who had held my hand at her mother's funeral? I need the truth, I said. That's what I need. I got up and walked to the sideboard where I'd left Dale's folder. I carried it back to the table and set it down in the center. "What is that?" my son-in-law asked. "An honest account of your business finances over the past 18 months, I said. The loans, the gambling accounts, the men who were outside my house 2 weeks ago. The silence was different from any silence I'd experienced before. Total. My daughter didn't move. "Where did you get that?" His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "It doesn't matter where I got it. What matters is that it's accurate. And what matters is that my daughter is sitting at this table and she doesn't know any of this." My daughter turned to look at her husband. I watched her face and I saw the moment she understood. Not fully, not yet, but enough. "What is he talking about?" she asked. It's complicated." $34,000, I said. 3 separate loans, sports betting sites going back to last spring, and a debt collector who has a prior arrest record standing in my driveway while I was at a doctor's appointment. My daughter stood up. Not in anger, in shock. She stood up the way people do when the floor has shifted under them. "Is this true?" she asked her husband. He tried. He tried the way people try when they know the answer but haven't surrendered yet. Fragments of explanation, context, timing, the pressure he'd been under, how he'd planned to fix it before anyone had to know. My daughter listened to about 30 seconds of it and then walked out of the kitchen. He turned to me. "You did this," he said. "You had to dig and investigate, and you did this to our marriage." "You did this to your marriage," I said. "I just found out about it." He left a few minutes later. I found my daughter sitting on the front porch steps with her arms wrapped around herself, looking at the street where she'd learned to ride that bike. I sat down next to her. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, "How long did you know?" "About a week." She nodded slowly. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "I wanted to tell you at a table," I said, "with him there, so there was no room to minimize it." She turned and looked at me. Her eyes were dry, which surprised me. Carol used to say she'd cry about things a day later, when she'd had time to process. "The house," she said. "If you'd signed. If I'd signed and the business couldn't make payments, the collateral would have been seized," I said. "That's how it works." She pressed her lips together and looked back at the street. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I want you to believe that." "I do believe that," I said, and I meant it. What she didn't know yet, what I hadn't told her, was about the settlement money. I told her that night, sitting on those porch steps. I told her about the accident, the knee, the credit union account she'd never seen a statement from. I told her that I had never been the cash-strapped old man her husband had been pressuring, that I had $240,000 sitting in an account I'd never touched, that I had watched them escalate for 2 months while carrying that secret, letting the situation reveal exactly what it needed to reveal. My daughter was quiet for a long time after that. "You let us think you were barely getting by," she finally said. It wasn't accusatory. More like she was processing it out loud. "I didn't claim to be struggling," I said. "I said I needed time to think. Your husband assumed the rest." She put her face in her hands. "Dad, I want to be clear about something," I said. "If you had come to me alone, just you, no pressure, no deadline, no debt collectors taking photos of my house, and told me your husband had a problem and needed help getting into treatment and getting his finances straightened out, I would have helped. I would have used that money to help your family get stable." She looked up at me. "But that's not what happened," I said. Dale filed the documentation with my son-in-law's primary lender the following week, not to destroy him, but to create a paper trail that protected my daughter in the event of a divorce proceeding, which Dale said was likely given what had surfaced. The debt collectors backed off once they understood there was legal representation involved. The county sheriff's office opened a separate inquiry into the private lender whose collector had appeared at my property. My son-in-law moved out of their house within 3 weeks. My daughter told me he'd confessed to a second gambling account she hadn't known about. The total debt, once fully tallied, was just over $47,000. She filed for divorce 6 weeks after that dinner. It wasn't the ending I'd wanted for her. Not even close. I would have traded every dollar in that credit union account to have had none of this be true. But the ending that was coming, the one where I signed my house over as collateral and the business collapsed, and I was 63 years old with nowhere to live, that ending would have been worse. For both of us. Carol used to say that the hardest part of loving someone is letting them see the consequences of their own choices. She said it about the kids when they were small, about small things, a broken toy, a missed curfew, a test they hadn't studied for. I understood it intellectually then. I understand it differently now. My daughter comes to dinner most Sundays. She's back in therapy, which she resisted for years after her mother died and finally accepted this past spring. She brought a casserole dish to my house on Christmas and told me, while we were doing dishes, that she wasn't angry at me, that she understood, even if it still hurt, in ways she hadn't fully sorted out. I used $12,000 of the settlement money to help her establish a new savings account, something only in her name, a foundation. It wasn't a guilt payment. It was what I'd always intended to do with that money, make sure the people I loved had something underneath them when the floor dropped out. The house is still mine. The pot roast recipe is still Carol's. The front porch is still there, with the same 2 steps where my daughter and I sat that October night and told each other the truth finally, for the first time in a long time. Some things, once you fight for them, you never take for granted again. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Sitting on those front porch steps with my daughter beside me, the October air cold enough that I could see my own breath, and neither of us saying anything for a long time. That silence wasn't empty. It was the kind that comes after something true has finally been said out loud, after the version of things people had agreed to pretend was real had finally fallen apart. I think about what would have happened if I had signed that paperwork, if I'd let the urgency work on me the way it was designed to. I would have lost the house. Not maybe. Not probably. The business was already underwater before they ever knocked on my door. The collateral would have been seized within a year, and I would have been a 63-year-old man with a bad knee and nowhere to go, watching my daughter try to hold together a marriage built on a foundation of lies she hadn't been allowed to see. What saved me wasn't luck. It was paying attention. It was the part of me that remembered Carol saying urgency is a salesman's trick, and instead of dismissing it, I wrote it down somewhere in myself and kept it, doing the right thing. Staying honest even when it would have been easier to just give in. Even when my own daughter was looking at me like I was the problem. That took something. It took holding to what I actually knew was true, when everything around me was pushing me toward what felt easier. But knowing something is wrong and being able to prove it are 2 different things. I had to be smart about it. I couldn't just feel suspicious. I had to build something solid. I called Dale. I hired Vince. I kept my phone records and saved every text. I kept my phone records and saved every text. I didn't confront my son-in-law with emotion. I confronted him with a folder. That's the part I want people to understand, especially anyone sitting right now in a situation where someone is pressuring them and they can feel it but can't quite name it yet. Your instincts are telling you something. Don't shout them down. Follow them quietly, carefully, until you can see clearly. And then there's the part that people don't talk about enough. The staying. After Carol died, after 11 years of doing this alone, the easiest thing in the world would have been to give my daughter whatever she asked for, just to keep her close. That's a temptation I understood completely, but I held on, not to the money, to the truth. To the belief that my daughter deserved to know what kind of man she was building her life with, even if finding out was going to hurt her badly. That took everything I had. Staying honest when honesty costs you something. That is not a passive thing. That is work. That is a choice you make over and over every day. I gave my daughter $12,000 to start over. Not because I owed it to her, because I could, and because she had earned something solid under her feet after everything that had fallen away. The rest of that settlement money is still in the credit union account. Carol put emergency cash in an envelope in the freezer. I kept $240,000 in an account nobody knew about. Different methods, same instinct. You protect what matters before you need to, not after. Raymond Caldwell is still in his house in Dayton. The pot roast recipe still lives on a handwritten card in the second kitchen drawer. Some things, once you fight to keep them, stay yours in a way they never quite did before.